Hey, thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me. So my name is Charles Christie. I work for Lonza. Sorry for my accent. I'm English, but my father was Irish, my wife is French, and I work for a Swiss company. So hopefully I'm going to go fast through a few slides. I want to talk a little bit about Blockbusters and who's ready. So let me dive into that, and I'm going to talk at the end a little bit about what we call Ibex Solutions, and Ibex is a response to the industry challenges. So just the disclaimers, you can read that and at leisure. So we see a lot of things happening in the marketplace, and those things are really some of the global trends, particularly the growing world population that needs medicines, particularly for infectious diseases. We see an aging population with issues in cardiovascular disease, but particularly neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer and Parkinson's. And we see on a regulatory pathway much more fast-track approvals, breakthrough designations. We see a real pressure on the timelines of clinical trials. The result for the industry is really an impact that has dramatic impacts on the supply chain. Uncertain demand, you don't know if you're going to get approval, you don't know what that first approval will be and how fast it will be, and you've less time to make those decisions, the accelerated timelines. So when we look at it, we see high risk and high reward. Here's an example. Biogen is one example of a project that failed in phase 3. Their molecule in Alzheimer failed in phase 3, very unfortunately, just in March of this year. That discontinuation, they'd already built. So John Cox, in the end of the phase 1 trial, took a decision to build capacity. So they built $1 billion plus facility in Switzerland, and that facility they hired 600 people. As we mentioned, unfortunately, both for Biogen and for the patients, that molecule failed, and we saw a resultant share price decrease of nearly $18 billion. Alzheimer's and Parkinson and other neurodegenerative diseases remain very attractive. We see over 100 molecules in the Alzheimer pipeline, and we see really 30 million or more patients currently growing, unfortunately, to over 50 million by the end of 2030. So huge unmet medical need. Here's an example, and I was fortunate in a previous life to work with this molecule from Merck & Co. This is Keytruda, which was an oncology molecule people know extremely well, was approved in 2014 for melanoma. Since then, which is becoming typical for oncology drugs, we see approval in multiple parallel indications, and we see 4 years after launch that Keytruda was number 5th drug globally, including small and large molecules, and we expect that to break $10 billion by the next years. So blockbusters still exist despite patient stratification and different areas. So let me give you some numbers. So some numbers: 3.2, 10, and 256. So what does that mean? What's 3.2, 10, and 256? If we look at Alzheimer's, 3.2 grams per patient per year could be a typical dose. 10 mg per kg per patient, dosed on a 3-monthly cycle, means you need 3.2 grams per patient per year. If we convert that to a fairly modest uptake, so an uptake of about 3 million patients in an accessible market, 3 million patients times 3 grams per patient means you need 10 metric tons. 10 metric tons of a biologic, typically a monoclonal antibody or other. What does that mean in real terms? That means 256 batches of a large scale, a 20,000 liter scale, the largest scale that Lonza currently has. That's more than 3 facilities, complete capacity, just for that one molecule. So imagine that hitting the pipeline. So I want to look at 2 different types of opportunity. One is the high-risk opportunity. You own one of those molecules in Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or in oncology. It's very high risk. Risk of approval is very limited, but you're unsure. You definitely need a lot of capacity, but there's huge clinical risk. The second scenario is a scenario of speed. You end up with a fast-track designation. You're in oncology or in a vaccine or something that gets a fast-track designation, or you in-license one of those molecules that needs tremendous demand, and you need to find that capacity, and again, that capacity is very large. I've converted that into 2 of the most common scenarios. The scenarios that we typically see in the industry as Lonza, we see an in-house, a build, versus a buy. So the build in gray, typically pharma would take a decision to build, building large-scale capacity, microbial or mammalian capacity, would typically take 4 to 5 years to build that capacity and another year to 2 years for regulatory submission and approval. What you see on the slide is that decision to build has to be taken early in phase 2, or even in the case of Biogen in phase 1B, and that leaves you very, very much open that facility will be built prior to the pivotal data coming out of phase 3, and that facility is under tremendous risk. The buy decision can delay that, so you can delay and make that decision to outsource to a CDMO, and that decision can be made later. But with the sheer amount of capacity that you need, the risk is that capacity will not be available in the market. Or even if you take that capacity, you're bound into that with a very strong contractual obligation to take that capacity, and that can be a contractual nightmare. It's even worse if you look at the fast track, if you look at the speed, so you've got a fast track designation. In order to meet that market need, you need to start building even in phase 1. So you're even not having any efficacy data, you've got some safety data, but you need to make that decision to build in order to supply the market that blockbuster. If you delay until you get efficacy data coming out of phase 2, the risk is that facility wouldn't be built and you wouldn't be ready for the market. You'd stock out, which would have negative consequences on your company, but also on the patients that need that medicine desperately. Same thing with the outsourcing, going to a CDMO. You can book the capacity, but the same risk. Is that capacity available, particularly under short notice? And what are the contractual obligations? If you don't need that capacity, you may still have to pay for it under a sort of take or pay or contractual obligation. So what if there was a different way? What if you could reduce the risks, increase the flexibility, and have a different way either to get to market quicker or to be able to reduce the investment risk? So Lonza has looked and we've developed a model that we call Ibex Dedicate. And Ibex is an agile response to these uncertainties, the pressures in the marketplace. In Visp in Switzerland, we're building a very large biopark, and I'll come back to that. And the idea of the biopark is that we're pre-investing in infrastructure in order to shorten the timeline to market or to reduce the risk. And the idea is that the biopark can be technology agnostic, mammalian, microbial, cell, gene therapy, any technology can be harbored. What do we mean by Ibex? Ibex is a 1 million square foot, so 100,000 square meters of active manufacturing space in 5 buildings. These buildings are superstructures, really very large structures. Each building can house up to 20,000 square meters of capacity in manufacturing area. That means 2 very large mammalian facilities or 9, 10, 12 smaller single-use facilities per facility, or even drug substance and drug product in the same facility. And one of the advantages of the site of this with over 3,000 people is we have centralized infrastructure, QC, warehousing, laboratories, development, MSAT. So that really helps to de-risk the project. Now, it's not just a concept. This is the latest slide. We just took this photo a couple of weeks ago, and you see it's an extension to the very large site of Visp. And there you see 2 buildings. The building furthest down is the Sanofi joint venture, which we announced. So that's the large-scale mammalian capacity that we announced with Sanofi. And the building in the center, these buildings are enormous. This is 120 meters long by 35 meters tall by 80 meters, is the building that we are offering for Ibex Dedicate, which is able to take any scale of capacity. And if you see by the scale, you see the apartments in Visp, the large apartments, which are 5 to 6 stories, are dwarfed by the building of Ibex. And this is the first of the 5 buildings that we will build subsequently. What does Ibex Dedicate mean in order that we built this pre-structure? It means that we can save 2 years or more in the design and build of these facilities. We don't need to find ground, we don't need to break ground, we don't need to build a concrete super shell, we don't need to build the clean rooms. We can go straight into the building, install the equipment, and move very rapidly into a construction, commissioning, and validation. And using the designs that we have for large-scale mammalian or large-scale microbial or cell and gene therapy, we can shave even more time. We don't have to take time to design, and we already have qualification and validation ready for these facilities. So 2 years compared to 4.5 by Big Pharma, what does that translate into? And we see really now, if we go back to these 2 scenarios, the scenarios under high risk, the fact that you can delay the build, in orange at the bottom of this slide, you can delay the build until at least efficacy data from phase 2B is coming out, and that build can be delayed until the phase 3, and the facility is still being built when interim data is coming from phase 3. So you could exit or you could repurpose that facility once you get data from phase 3, which is not the case with an own build. That facility would already be built and be ready for use. The same thing that we see, so we're reducing the risk by the later decision to build, but we're also reducing the overall project capex because of the site of Visp, the infrastructure, the QC labs, the warehouse, the laboratories. That overall capex is reduced by 25 to 30%. It's even more important on the fast track or the fast track designation, where you need to get capacity and you need to be first to market. Again, the self-build or the outsourcing model doesn't really work, whereas in the case of Ibex, again in the orange, what we see is a shortened build, which means you can be 30 months or more quicker to market, and first to market is clearly the most important in breakthrough therapies. And again, the risk is reduced because you're still building when you're getting data from the phase 2 studies. Ibex is not just a capacity and a building, it's also about business models, it's also about the way that we interact with our clients. And here are some of the levers or levers that we would use in the operating and the ownership models. So Lonza could own the facility and operate the facility on behalf of our clients, but the clients can also own the facility. And in Switzerland, ownership and substance in Switzerland would lead to a 10-year tax break. And that can be very advantageous for a commercial product. Again, we can invest as Lonza so that the capex is invested by Lonza, so no capex until market approval. And then the model could be that it's paid, the facility is paid for by operational costs, by annual costs, or you as a customer could invest, or we can co-invest, as was the case with Sanofi. One of the most important things is the ability for the contractual flexibility. We know molecules fail, we know demand can change. So we have, in the Ibex commercial models, we have an ability to look at how we would use underutilization, how that capacity could be shared with Lonza, or even how that facility could be repurposed. Should that molecule fail, Lonza could repurpose as a large CDMO and use that facility for other molecules or other products. So last couple of slides. Finally, Ibex, we think, is a very innovative. It's a response to the market that we see this acceleration, but high risk, but also high reward. Patients are needing these molecules, Alzheimer's and others. So we think Ibex offers a very agile advantage, both in terms of facility, but also in terms of the contractual and ownership models. Maybe a question, what is Ibex? And the last slide really is there. Ibex is a mountain goat in Switzerland, and so the Ibex are very large. If you see them on the mountain run, they're really large, and they're quite aggressive occasionally. We chose Ibex because Ibex is attuned with its environment. They live in the mountains, they're very agile, they're able to exist in a very harsh environment. And we think Ibex offers that same advantage of agility, flexibility, and in tune with the modern pharma industry. So thank you for your attention. A couple of slides. We're at Lonza, just here from the theatre, just down there. And should you want to know more, there are much more on lonza.com/Ibex, including brochures and videos, and I'm even the rock star in one of the videos. So thank you for your attention, and I'll welcome any questions.